Right, let's get started. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar, which is about optimizing your business using the 3 lines of defense model by leveraging the Impero platform. So with me today, I have the pleasure of presenting Morten Christensen, who's our head of customer success, and Kristian Bollerup, who's the VP and head of corporate risk and internal audit at the Lego Group. So Morten and Kristian, perhaps you want to introduce yourselves.
Yeah, sure. I can go first, and then we can introduce our guests afterwards. Yeah, in short, my name is Morten Christensen. I'm heading our support department here at Impero. I'll be answering legs in handling the questions and bring them to Kristian and Shane for today.
Thank you. And Kristian, thank you for joining today. Can you please present yourselves to the participants?
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me, Shane. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a few words of introduction, perhaps, since I'm not part of the Impero team on a daily basis. As you say, I'm head of corporate risk and internal audit in the Lego Group. I guess most of you would know the Lego Group. We produce the Lego bricks. We're a fairly large, but still privately owned and held company out of Denmark. So I would have sort of some perspectives on risk management and internal audit from a very operational perspective. It just so happens that I am also a board member in an insurance company in Denmark. So at least some would say that I'm fit and proper, and I can, throughout the conversation, now and then give you some perspectives on 3 lines when it comes to financial sector companies. I do notice that quite a few of the attendees are from financial sector companies. So where it makes sense, I will try to provide my perspective on 3 lines from that particular angle. Happy to be here and looking forward to the conversation and the presentation throughout.
Brilliant, thank you, Kristian. Just to elaborate a bit on that, when we're talking about the 3 lines of defense, it's applicable for all types of companies. So all of you here today that are not part of a financial sector company, just stay with us. It's still very relevant. There's just a few different particularities that whenever we talk about financial sector, and I think that's what Kristian wants to bring to light as well. As for myself, to give a quick introduction of myself, my name is Shane and I'm a business development director here at Impero. I am driving the sales activities in the Nordic countries and in the UK as well. I bring a decade of experience from professional services mainly. I have first-hand experience, very practical experience with all 3 lines of defense, having worked as a finance accountant where I was responsible for designing the processes, identifying the risks, and designing and operating these controls, to being a management consultant where I was advising on enterprise risk and controls transformation journeys, and then also being an internal and external auditor where I was assessing the effectiveness of these frameworks and processes. So I have a very good understanding of all the different angles of being part of your 3 lines of defense model. And I think basically the common thing around all of the different angles that I see it from I've been part of is that it's really, really good when you understand how to work together across different lines of functions, as you may say, but it also brings a lot of difficulties. So that's why today we're gonna show you how you can leverage the Impero platform by basically optimizing your 3 lines of defense. I can imagine that everyone here today is part of your company's risk management mechanism one way or the other. And also you have first-hand experience that it's really, really effective. It's really brilliant when you can work across functions with each other, but also in reality, it is really difficult. And that's some of the things that we're going to touch upon today. You are going to get the full experience, meaning that within the Impero platform, we have 3 primary modules, and we are going to showcase all 3 of them for you today. So you'll be seeing the risk management module, you'll be seeing the control management module, and the reporting module as well, where we are basically talking around the topic of how you leverage Impero, optimizing your 3 lines of defense. So we brought Kristian today really to bring some expert knowledge, some industry insights as well, how you do it in practical terms, and then we'll provide the platform knowledge. Throughout the webinar today, you have the option of asking questions, and please feel free to do so. We will answer these as we go along, and we'll also hold time at the end to answer any of the questions that we haven't answered throughout the webinar. So welcome all to this webinar. We hope that you're going to find it insightful, and I am now going to pass it on to Kristian. So Kristian, we've been talking a lot about these 3 lines of defense, but what is it really? Perhaps you can tell us all so we'll get a common understanding of what do we mean by 3 lines of defense and why do companies operate this way?
Sure. Let me talk into that, and perhaps first provide a bit of a disclaimer, because when we have 3 lines of defense as the title on this slide and as a title of the webinar, there's a grain of salt to be taken around the concept, because 3 lines of defense has sort of been left behind. Lots of companies today talk about 3 lines, but taking away the of defense part of it is a way to perhaps soften up the very, very siloed approach that certain companies ended up having adopted 3 lines of defense in its original model years back. Perhaps this is a particular concern in some of the financial sector companies, where you tend to have very siloed structures. But just to introduce, for the sake of good order, the defense lines, let me start with obviously first line functions. This is the day-to-day business. This is line management. This is operations, as you will find in all companies, financial as well as non-financial sector companies. So first line functions is where you actually do business, so to speak. This is where the processes are owned. This is where you manage risk on a daily basis. You perform controls. You run your business to stay within the guardrails of the company. You make hundreds, thousands of decisions on a daily basis. That's part of doing business. You see risk, you accept risk, you take risk, you operate within the guardrails of the company. So first line functions is really the front office of your business. That's where things are happening on a daily basis. First line define the processes, they design the controls that are implemented, they perform the controls, and they also monitor the controls and the KPIs of the business. Then we move to second line functions. where you have oversight, you have standard setting, you have subject matter expertise, and you have an evaluation of the effectiveness of your daily business. In the perfect world, I would say that there is a super close collaboration between first and second line function. As I started out by saying, that collaboration was sort of put aside in the original 3 lines of defense model. Hence, there was a need to soften it up, because a very siloed approach could lead to some of the difficulties in an effective, efficient risk management of a company. So first and second line functions would hopefully work closely together. They, both of them, report into the management of the company. And then you have the third line function, the internal audit function, which is an independent function of the company that would report to the audit committee or the board of directors or another independent body in the overall governance of the company. The third line should normally stay fairly, and I say fairly, segregated from first and second line. Also here, I think it's, and I can see that in my own company, it's very, very efficient if you have a close cooperation also between the third line function, internal audit, and the first and second line functions of the company. So segregated, independent, yes, but hopefully in close contact with daily business on a day-to-day basis. That's also why I sort of put a dotted line from internal audit into the executive leadership team or the executives of the company. I would hope that internal audit is not a function that sort of stays behind closed doors and only comes out when there's a board meeting or an audit committee where there's a formal reporting line. So as said, it has been a concern behind 3 lines of defense that it became very, very formal with separate reporting requirements, separate activities, separate almost tick the box exercises running in each silo of the company. So 3 lines of defense or just 3 lines today. Some of the difficulties in working with 3 lines is that you often have a number of assurance providers that you need to satisfy. I have actually on the next slide put a only illustrative and not even comprehensive overview of some of the activities we run in the Lego group. And as you can see from this brief even overview, we have a number of reports, updates, activities that needs to be sent in and sent out of the various functions in the company. As you can see, it's a fairly complex picture, even just starting it out on the back of an envelope like I did on this slide. And one of the challenges when working with 3 lines of defense is that you have different assurance providers asking for different controls, asking for different reports, asking for a risk overview, and all of them coming with another reporting requirement in their back end to satisfy. So I think in essence, what I wanted to show with this slide is the complexity of assurance in a company where you have 3 lines. I would say that even taking out one of the columns, you may be in a company where there's no internal audit function. Well, it doesn't really ease up the complexity that much. That there's still a variety of activities, a variety of controls, a variety of activities that needs to be looked at and monitored and potentially audited by various assurance providers. So this slide is meant as an illustration of the complexity of companies nowadays, non-financial as well as financial sector companies, and actually shows where I think a tool, a solution like Impero could potentially help your company in having a more uniform, a more aligned, a more agreed a way of working with risk and control. So I think with that sort of brief introduction to a very well-known concept, let me hand it back to Sianne to get us introduced to risk management in Impero.
Thank you, Kristian. So basically what I'm hearing you saying is, as to trying to sum up, when we're talking about the 3 lines of defense, it really is a model as to how you effectively manage your risks. And what I also hear you saying is that it all really starts with understanding your risks. So what I've opened up for you now is our dashboard of Impero. For those of you who don't know Impero, all you need is a web browser and some internet. It's a software as a service. So you get a login here and you enter the dashboard here. I'll start out by showing you the risk management module, which is basically a way, as Kristian is saying, in order to get a full understanding of the risk landscape that we're exposed to in order to optimally use our capital and resources, which is basically what risk management is all about. We really need to get an understanding of what risks are we exposed to. And that's basically the first step when we talk about Impero and the platform. You have an overview here where we can basically create a number of risk maps which would be relevant for your company. So you can, it's very flexible, so you can design these risk maps in whatever structure you would want. It could be based on your, say, organizational structure. It could be based on your functional structure. It could be based on from a process perspective. So what I've demonstrated here is that you can take both the enterprise risk approach where you're doing a top down, but you can also go the other way around and you can do the bottom up. So if the theme today will be compliance risks, but I think what's really important to reiterate here is basically that Impero can hold any type of risk and control. So whether that be in financial or tax or compliance, it can basically it can support you in all of your compliance activities. But if I dive into our compliance risk directory, it's basically divided into 2 groups. So first of all, it's our, say, identification state. So we want to identify here what types of compliance risks are we exposed to. And the way we do that is by adding new risks. So all of the risks we've identified, we tag a name to the risk and we add our description of the risk. We have the option of indicating whether it's a global risk or whether it's a local risk. So some risks may be relevant to some of our markets, some of our entities, but not the group as a whole. We then have the option of tagging the risks to our financial statement assertions and to our objectives. So our objectives relevant for enterprise risk, that approach, and our assertions is more from a process level when we talk about financial reporting risks. I think what's really important to say here is basically this section here is flexible, so if there's some other parameters you would rather want to report on, that's completely possible as well. But basically, this is the identification state of your risk assessment. As I was saying, we have the scoping exercise, whether it's a global or a local risk, and we can then tag the relevant entities to each of these risks. So once we've done our risk identification exercise, we then need to get an understanding of the evaluation and the prioritization of these. And it comes with a very nice illustrative risk map, so we understand what our inherent risk exposure is and what our residual risk exposure is. Of course, in order to be able to talk about that and in order for that to make sense, I will need to show you how you basically do that exercise. So if we take an example here of, again, bribes, there's a real risk that we are having some of our suppliers, some of our third parties paying bribes when they're conducting business on behalf of us. We can go in here and we can prepare our inherent risk assessment. It's a standard 5x5 metric here, but we can mold it into whatever it looks like for your company. And we can then add a response to this risk. So what do we want to do? And it's, again, everything is built upon COSO. So we have the option of transferring the risk, avoiding the risk, reducing the risk, or simply accepting the risk. When we choose the reduce response, it then triggers a connection to our control management module, and we have the possibility of basically connecting our risks with controls within Impero. And the way we do that is by adding our mitigating actions here. So an example for bribes, we could do third-party audits, and we can then link to our control within the control management module. We have the possibility of evaluating how much the risk coverage would be when adding this control, and we can add as many controls as we would like. So we may even have a anti-bribery and corruption policy that would also be relevant for this risk. And once we've identified each of the relevant controls that would help mitigate this risk, we then evaluate what our residual risk exposure is, again, impact likelihood. And this is basically how we get our risk directory. We have our inherent risk assessment, we have our residual risk assessment, we have a connection to all of our controls to make sure, so we can basically evaluate that controls are only designed if and when they address a risk, and likewise we can make sure that all of our risks are adequately addressed by a control. So Kristian, that was a quick introduction to the Impero system and how you can basically help ensuring that you're getting all of the input from the different parts of the company in order to get a full understanding of your risk landscape. So now we have an understanding of our risk landscape, and now it's time to talk about controls. Could you put a few more words to that?
Yeah, sure, I can. And Shanna, I think you said it well. I think the starting point is to agree on the risks we're having as a company. I think that would be that is step number one, to develop smart controls that can cover the risk and can be shared across the functional lines, the three lines that we discussed before. What is clever in a solution like Impero is how you can use the metadata, the tags that you add to the risk, so that it satisfies a number of objectives. when you assign the tags, the metadata, you add parameters to the risks and eventually to the controls, so that various assurance providers can extract exactly the risks and exactly the controls eventually that they need in order to satisfy their reporting requirements. The very, very complex picture I showed before. So what's clever in a solution like Impero is the opportunity to use one control for multiple purposes. And I think that is, as said, one of the very hands-on challenges we see when we're working in 3 lines. How do we agree on a risk picture? How do we agree which risks are relevant? How do we make sure that 3 lines does not become a tick the box exercise in first line, where they have a KPI that they want to perform against, in second line, where they have a monitoring responsibility, and then in third line, where there's an audit requirements and an audit report to satisfy. I think it's essential that we across the lines agree on one aligned risk and control picture, or a risk and control framework. And I think that's where a solution like Impero comes in super handy. So when I talk to my colleagues in the LEGO group about combined assurance, about getting to good controls over risk on a day-to-day basis, these are some of the steps we're taking. It's 5 fairly short bullets. It's a fairly difficult exercise, I would say. I would be happy to kind of talk about combined assurance for hours and hours, and I would have multiple slide decks to show and tell around that topic. I think that's for another day. So with a very sort of audit mindset, I just put it down into 5 bullets. I know that's very much of a shortcut, but I said happy to elaborate on a different day. Step 1, establish a baseline of risk and controls. Really actually agree on the risks and agree on the controls. Have a conversation with first line functions to communicate the objective of the control you want to implement. If you explain, well, we are trying to mitigate this risk, then I would be honestly surprised if there's no control in place already. If I, in the LEGO group, point out a specific risk around third parties, the one you described just before, Shannon, then that risk has certainly been considered by the business already. It was actually in their mindset when they onboarded the third party in the first place. You actually did have some of the considerations around compliance at the third party, around sort of adopting a Lego-like culture. Most often I find that when I kind of call out a risk, there is a control already in place. The same types of considerations have been performed by line management. So having an open dialogue around the risk landscape allows you to identify controls already existing. You can put them into Impero. If it so happens that there is no control, well, if you communicate the objective of what we are trying to mitigate, then I think it's much easier to agree on the control steps. That also means that I often involve other assurance providers that we have in the Lego group when I work on combining assurance. The third-party audits example again, well, we have had an integrity due diligence function for years, and they work exactly on mitigating third-party risk. So many of the controls they perform actually mitigates the risk that first line is having around their third parties. So again, taking a holistic picture involving other assurance providers in the company allows you to have one aligned risk picture across the company. So do involve other assurance providers in the company. As said, integrity due diligence is anchored in our legal function, another assurance provider we are having. So you can easily find functions that support a good risk and control structure in your company. Bullet number 3, communicate. Really make sure that you educate first line functions in the why. Why is it that we need controls? Why is it that we need to mitigate risk? I said I am positive that they will agree, but the communication part is the essential one. They may tell you we have these and these steps to mitigate the risk. If they can easily add 5 or 10% to the tasks they are running anyway, then you may be satisfied. The second line function may be satisfied, and there's not a ton of work involved on top of what the business is doing already. So far, so good, and these are just easy bullet points to put down on a slide to present in a webinar. Probably not that easy in real life, as said. So I think bullet number 4, multiple iterations and continuous change management is key to having a good comprehensive assurance framework in your company. The controls may be misunderstood. If you post them in a guideline, broadcast that on your intranet, I can guarantee you that that control will be read in as many different ways as you have employees. So go back, look at the control performance, go back to your colleagues, discuss, refine, adjust, and have continuous change management to have a risk overview which is up to date and some controls to mitigate that are in line with what's actually happening in the company. It's not just a tick the box exercise. A control should obviously reflect a real control effort. If it's just ticking the box on a piece of paper or even in a solution like Impero, well, then the value is probably fairly low from that. So easy 5 steps. I've intentionally sort of left number 5 behind, but I think we'll go back to actually see how controls are set up in the Impero solution.
Thank you, Kristian. So basically, as Kristian is saying, as soon as we have our understanding of the risk landscape, we need to plug controls in place to make sure that we're basically addressing the risk. And we need these controls to basically be a real reflection of what is done already, but we also need this overview that everyone understands what our control framework looks like, so that we're not having, for example, redundant controls, double effort, etc. So what I'm showing you here right now is again our dashboard. What you see are the so-called control programs. They should be seen as containers for each and every of the controls that we're having. I'm going to scroll down to the compliance container that I have right now, just as an example to extend on what we've already discussed within our risk framework. Previously, I had a link to our anti-bribery and corruption policy and our third-party audits. And I'll spend a bit of time to talk you through what a control looks like in Impero and how it can support the control performers in easily understanding it in a simple way and also easily perform these controls. And then we'll end up with the reporting part afterwards. I'm going to show you both of the anti-bribery, corruption and the third-party audit, simply just to show you how you can make the controls as intelligent, as complex as you would like, or as simple as you would like. So it basically comes down to the maturity and the ambitions of each of your companies. So a control is divided into, say, four sections. First of all, we have our control name. We have a control description, which should be seen more as, for example, a control objective. So what do we want to achieve with this control? And perhaps a bit more background information if needed. We then have the opportunity to add in this control to a program, these containers that I spoke about earlier. And then we have this tag library where Kristian was mentioning that it's really important to understand the metadata. We often present them as reporting dimensions. So whatever way, shape, or form you want to be able to report on your control framework, your risk framework, all of that is basically driven by our tag catalog. So for example, we can have our entity dimensions, we can have country dimensions, we can have whether it's a key or a non-key control. Again, completely flexible, you can tailor make it so that it makes sense to you. We have our scheduling section here, which is basically helping you to make sure that it's underpinned by an automatic workflow. So we make sure that these controls are being pushed out in a timely manner to the right people, making sure that these are being performed timely. In this example here, just to give you a quick intro to the technical details, this is an annual control that starts from basically today. We have a period we're looking at, which is the year of 2021. And what I'm saying here is that we want it to be due, so we want it to be performed 3 months before the end of the year. So right now, if I'm going to perform this control, I have a deadline of the 30th of September. I'm being notified 30 days before, so this gives me 30 days to perform the control. I have the possibility to differentiate between the performer and the reviewer, so the reviewer gets appropriate time to perform their review task. We have a few extra advanced options here that I'm not going to dive deeper into today. We then have the assignment of roles and responsibilities. So in this instance, I'm responsible for performing the control, and my colleague Morten is responsible for reviewing the control. We have the option of enforcing segregation of duties so that I'm not performing and reviewing my own work. And the most important thing about this control is basically what we call the heart of the control, which should be seen very much as a questionnaire. So we basically design the controls ourselves using these, say, selected options that we have on the right bar. And in this instance here, I've made a very simple, to me it's a simple control in a way that we are basically asking the control performer, have you reviewed and updated your anti-bribery and corruption policy, yes or no? We can then work with basically what we call a required field. So they have to perform this, they have to answer this question in order to submit the control. And likewise, we work with the conditions. So an example here, if you have reviewed and updated your policy, then please attach your updated document. And likewise, if you haven't updated the policy, please provide an explanation as to why it wasn't updated. And then we give the opportunity of providing additional comments. So in a very simple, say, step-by-step way through building blocks, almost through Lego blocks, now when we're having Kristian with us, we can basically guide our control performers through what they need to do. So an example here, yes, I have reviewed and updated my corruption policy. Well, then I need to upload my file and I can provide a comment before submitting the control. Or no, I haven't, please explain why you haven't done it. And this is how we basically interact with 9 out of 10 of the Impero users. It's basically via email workflows, automated workflows. So they get an email saying it's now time to perform the anti-bribery and corruption policy. It is then done, it's submitted, it's uploaded, everything is stored in one single database, so that basically internal audit, external audit can get access to it as and when they like. And likewise for the business, they are comfortable that what they've done is also easily documented for others to review and confirm the effectiveness. So that's an example of a control, and I'm just going to provide you with one other quick example just to be able to show you the possibility of adding more complexities as you basically mature within your companies. So what I didn't show you before was that within this assignment section here, we can work with user groups. So in this instance, we are talking about having to perform third-party audits. I can assign this control to my group compliance group. So it doesn't matter which individual is going to perform this control. It can be anyone within the group as long as one of them are doing it. And I can then have that reviewed as well. I have then built up a bit of a more complex questionnaire to basically still show you that it can be complex to the one designing the control, but for the actual performer, it's very easy, it's very simple. So I can basically submit this control again by saying, yes, there is a signed audit clause within the supplier code of conduct. I am now basically doing my supplier audit. What's relevant for this supplier is all 4 areas subject to review. We have an intelligent way of say, communicating with our control performers. So we can basically give them here a working paper that they should use in order to perform their controls. So we can upload guidance to them that they can use as they go along. Again, provide your working paper back so we have the documentation, and we can then provide some conclusions as to our control as well. So the audit review that was performed, that did result in some non-compliance observations, and I then have to summarize what these were before submitting my control. Or it may have been that there were no observations, and I can then provide an explanation if I would like. So it's a very simple, very easy way to basically make sure that our colleagues that may not have the same risk and controls appreciation, they easily understand, they're being prompted to make these controls, so we make sure that we not only understand our risk landscape, but we also address these risks and we mitigate them to an appropriate level. So Kristian, we have 10 minutes left in order to talk about the reporting, and then we will answer any questions in the end. So let's address the reporting requirements that each of the lines may have.
Sure, and actually I can do my part fairly quickly, because I think one learning I've had throughout my career is that you sort of get what you measure. So if you report on something, then it gets done. I know it sort of goes against the intentions of the new 3 lines, which is a much more collaborative way of working. But I think if we take the initial steps first and actually agree on what to report on, what are the risks, what are the controls, then I'm sort of less concerned. So reporting is essential to having a well-functioning combined assurance across the company. So measure and report, where a solution like Impero is helpful, is the way you can sort of filter and combine the tags, the metadata into all sorts of reporting. Going back to the complex example I started out with multiple reporting requirements, multiple sources of information, if you kind of build that into the metadata, then you can actually satisfy multiple requirements by performing the control just once. So measure and report, then you go back and do another iteration. If things are not working, then you basically start with bullet number 1 again. Back to you, actually, Sanne, to show you an example of how reporting works in Impero.
Thank you, Kristian. So the last module that I'm going to showcase for you today is our report module. And that's basically combining all of the information that we have within our risk management module and within our control module. We have 2 different types of reports. We have a standard report where we have the option of providing a status overview as to whether these controls are in fact being performed as they should. And we have our task-based reports, which gives us the option of measuring the answers that the control performers are providing in these questionnaires, in these control performances. So I'll provide an example of a report, and this is now a standard report. We can basically get a nice and simple overview in this instance of all of our control programs here, where we can see out of 108 activities that should be performed in the period June till December, 64 of them have already been performed, they've been completed. 7 of them are overdue, and some of them are yet to be sent out, so they're pending. So that's a nice simple overview. Even if you're saying in the front line, if you're in the first line, you're responsible for making sure that these risks you've identified, that they have been addressed through controls and they have in fact been operated. You can get this overview that's simply telling you are some controls performed, or some of them are they not performed. And likewise, if you're sitting and you're the supporting function in the second line, if you're helping, if you're monitoring as well, evaluating the effectiveness, you can get a status report here to understand whether some of the controls probably need a bit more attention or rework because these have not been performed. And likewise, if you are the internal auditor, you're the external auditor, you get a nice quick overview as to what the status is of the control. So that's a high-level overview. What's interesting, of course, would oftentimes be the ones that are overdue and the reason for that. We then have the option here of basically pivoting our data in whatever way, shape, or form we want, based on, as Kristian was telling earlier, the metadata that we have defined in our control program. So basically, whatever metadata we can report on. And as an example, we want to look at our overdue controls. All of these numbers here are basically interactive, so we can click on them, we can get a list, we can get an understanding of why have these controls not been performed. So in this instance, we can see that a lot of the controls are basically waiting for, let's see here, overdue. I actually have the opportunity to search on a status here. So all of the overdue controls, I can see that I myself may need a kind reminder that some of these controls needs to be performed. So I have the opportunity to do both update on these controls, either by sending a reminder or reassign if, say, for instance, I was on maternity leave. So it's also very easy for the first line to go in, make any adjustments needed in order to make sure that these controls operations are actually progressing as you would expect. So back to the overview here, very simple overview. We have an intelligent way as well, just like the workflow, the automated workflow for the controls. We have the opportunity to send out, say, recurring push reports, as we call them. So we can basically call this a status report, and we can say, for example, Shenna is responsible for making sure that these controls are performed. I can then go in and define and say every month, the first day of the month, Shenna is going to get a report, and I can even write her a nice little message as to basically some instructions as to what needs to be done. So again, in a simple manner, we have the opportunity of monitoring that the controls have actually been performed in a timely manner. And the last thing we want to show within Impero for today, to basically back up that this is relevant for all three lines. We've talked about having a common risk overview. We have that in our risk management module. We're talking about having a clear link to our internal controls to make sure that all of the risks that should be addressed are in fact addressed, and likewise that we don't have any redundant controls that are not mitigating the risk. Again, a clear overview for everyone, regardless of where you're sitting within the company. Obviously, it's important for me to say that we do have effective user administration, so you can only get access to look at what you actually say have the need for. So that's an important point. What we haven't quite talked about is external audit and their need. And that's where, again, you have the opportunity to giving them view access, and they can basically go into the system and they can, say, filter on whatever data they need for a given period. So if they come and they do their audit within, say, the year of, say, 2021, we can then see all of the controls that are relevant for 2021, what have been completed, and what's still pending. And they then have the opportunity to drill even further down and proving that basically that this control has been performed, and they can find all of the relevant information. So this is how Impero can effectively help you across your business, across your function, making sure that you have a common understanding, that you have a common view of your risks, your controls, and that you're able to provide effective assurance that these controls have in fact been operated as intended. We have a few minutes left for questions. So Morten, do we have any questions that the participants would like answered?
Yeah, definitely. I answered a few as we went on here, but there are a few left. I think, well, a handful of them at least is for you, Kristian. So how does it work with you being both the head of corporate risk and internal audit? It seems a bit as two functions.
No, a great and relevant question, but actually sort of underlines the point of 3 lines versus 3 lines of defense, which was the more siloed approach you probably had a couple of years back. I think what I am head of in the Lego group is the risk management process. So I don't own, and I think that's a very important call out, I don't own any risks. That's sort of outside the scope of both, obviously, internal audit, but also the corporate risk function. So I own the process of risk management, but not the risks themselves, if that makes sense. And then, as said, it sort of underlines how you actually work with 3 lines in, I would say, a fairly up-to-date setup. But great and relevant question. So and I'll be happy to sort of elaborate if anyone wants to have that conversation in more detail. Thanks, Morten.
Yeah, and thank you for the answer. I think there's, and maybe I'll let you answer this one first. Shanna, I can assist you in this as well. But there's a question on, well, who actually typically owns Impero or a system like ours, and now we've talked a lot about well, internal audit, and so it's a bit on, well, where is the ownership actually typically located?
I want to provide a few extra words to that one.
Sorry?
Do you want to answer the question, or would you like?
I can do that. So I think the question is around, well, who or which function actually typically owns a solution like ours? So is the ownership within internal audit, or is it within finance, or within some place else? Since, well, and maybe you can elaborate a bit on or pitch in on this as well, Kristian. Since, well, I suppose that internal audit should not necessarily, at least, own a solution like ours. They might play a major role in this, and of course, in some instances, they might play a huge role in this, but not necessarily be the owners. I don't know if you can put up with a few words on that as well.
No, I would definitely agree. It's usually a second line function that would own Impero. As said, it doesn't take anything out of the 3-line setup, but I think it's usually a second line function that would own Impero.
I think if I can just elaborate a bit, putting aside the topic of today with the 3 lines of defense, I think what is hopefully quite apparent for you now is how flexible Impero is, and how you can basically use it for all of your compliance processes. So whether you're sitting owning the risks within the business, whether you're part of, say, procurement, finance, HR, you can still own the Impero tool. So it's basically, it comes down to what's the intended use of Impero. And likewise, if you're part of compliance, if you're part of risk, or if you're part of internal audit, again, what's the intended use of Impero, who should be using it, and that would basically be the owner. And what we see normally done with our clients using Impero is that they oftentimes get quite say they understand new ways of working the platform within the company. So oftentimes it's used across both, say, tax, finance, HR, IT, compliance, risk management as well, and sometimes internal audit as well. So you can really see it as a hybrid model that you can have any and all of your functions being supported by.
Perfect. Now we all managed to pitch in on that question. So that's all good. We only have a half minute or so left. We don't have, I think there's a few questions that might need, but the answers might be a bit longer. So I think that we'll put the questions on hold, and every single unanswered questions we'll reach out to you guys afterwards. And of course, both the slide deck here will be shared, and also the webinar will be available on our website afterwards.
Thank you, Morten. So basically, thank you everyone for attending today. We hope you found it insightful. It was a high-level introduction to all 3 modules. If you want to get more detailed introduction, please feel free to reach out to us, or you can enter our website where we have some of the previous week's webinars recorded, where we have a deep dive into our control management and our risk management module. But by all means, please reach out to us, and as Morten is saying, all of the questions that have not been answered today will definitely be answered. You will all receive a response to your question. So thank you so much, Kristian. Thank you, Morten, and thank you everyone for attending today, and have a nice day.